want to believe this, do you? I've really no idea.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to Eliza's Media Hot Takes, where I upload movie and TV reviews. And in today's video, we're talking about the movie Dial M for Murder.
It was funny to think that just a year ago I sat in that Knightsbridge pub actually planning to murder her.
While it has all of the common themes of typical Alfred Hitchcock films, sinister intentions, suspicion, mystery, intrigue, all of these things are pretty common in this type of movie. As far as Alfred Hitchcock films are concerned, this was my favorite. Now granted, I've probably only seen about half of the movies he's ever made, so take that with a grain of salt. This film basically centers around a man named Tony, who plots to murder his cheating wife Margot, which is an intriguing starting point to begin with, and most of the movie follows the investigation that takes place after he actually puts his plan into action. And while it is a great mystery film in my opinion, one thing I liked about how they told the story is that you as the audience actually know what's going on and you're watching the characters figure it out. It's an interesting premise to begin with, and I found the storytelling throughout the movie to just be very clever. I feel like so many mystery movies make everything so complicated and there's so many storylines to follow. In this movie, there's basically 5 characters, and almost the entire movie is filmed in this one apartment. Now, don't get me wrong, mystery movies with complicated storylines can be very interesting as well, but I think it really takes dedication and talent to make a very simple storyline that interesting. So now let's get to my rating. So, a rating is, of course, a matter of your own personal opinion of the film. But that being said, there are a few things that I didn't really like about the movie that I'm not holding against it. And that's because I realized the things I didn't like, for example, the way people talk. This was made in the 1950s. It's one of the reasons I don't like watching movies from the 1950s. The way they did dialogue in movies from the 1950s is just generally unappealing to me.
Do you remember the letters you wrote to me?
Yes, I remember.
After I read them, I burnt them. I thought it best. All except one. You probably know the one I mean.
Yes, I think I do.
But I don't feel it's fair to hold that against the movie in general. I don't want to lower the rating of a movie just because of the time period it was made. It's like watching a romantic comedy, knowing you hate romantic comedies, and then giving it a low rating because it's a romantic comedy. So setting aside those things that have to do with the time the movie was made in, I am giving this a 5 out of 5 star rating for being a good mystery movie with an intriguing storyline. For one thing, when it comes to movies that involve mystery, I love those moments, or even survival stories. I love those moments where you're watching characters get suspicious of each other and not really sure what to think of the other's intentions.
Tony, there was a pair of stockings here.
Deliberately planting clues to ensure a conviction.
And this movie just exemplified that sense so well, and I loved that. So now let's get to what I liked and disliked about this movie, and at this point, there will be spoilers. So, one thing I didn't particularly like about this movie is how easily Tony convinces a college buddy he hasn't seen in 20 years to commit this murder.
What makes you think I'll agree? For the same reason that a donkey with a stick behind him and a carrot in front always goes forwards and not backwards.
Now yes, I understand there was blackmail involved, but at the same time, it was just a little too easy. I just felt that that was very unrealistic, not to the point that it's something that's totally impossible, so I didn't really hold it against the story in general, but come on now. I guess that's really the only thing that I didn't like about this movie, aside from what I mentioned earlier, which is the way they did dialogue back in the 1950s. A lot of that is just not very interesting to me. I don't particularly like that style. But now let's get to what I did like about this movie. So, I particularly liked the inspector. I mentioned earlier that I really liked the storyline of this movie, and based on what happens, it almost seems like the inspector is this guy who just doesn't really care. He's just there to close a case and move on about his business. But in the second half of the movie, you really see him come through as someone who actually does care about the truth and wants to wrap this case up right. And in a way, kind of ends up being the hero of this movie. I also really enjoyed watching Tony try to interfere with the investigation once the police arrived. Now, one thing that really threw me in this movie was that the murder attempt actually failed, and she ended up killing the guy in self-defense. At first I kind of thought, okay, I didn't expect that. Now what are they gonna do? But watching Tony try to interfere with the investigation, Margot making all these slips that kind of poke holes in her story, and then seeing Margot get charged with murder, I thought was all really interesting. I think my favorite part of this movie was when the inspector, Tony, and Margot are in the apartment, and they're talking about what actually happened and how they can prove it. I know this is something that's really common in murder mysteries, but it really is the simplest mistake that can bring you down. And this, like a lot of other murder mysteries, is a great example of that. And the last thing I want to mention that I really liked is that the story doesn't waste your time. The story pretty much gets going right away. You learn who the characters are and how they relate to each other really quickly. There's not all this fluff to add drama, or attempts to add other storylines, or attempts to give you these really complicated backstories of the characters. You learn what you need to know about the characters, and then you're shown what's going on. And while I might not miss a lot of the cheesy, corny dialogue from the 1950s, I kind of do miss that kind of storytelling, because I feel like in today's movies, you know, movie makers have to be competitive, and I get that, but I feel like today, people constantly want something that's fast-paced and has like a million different storylines going on, and if they're not, they're complaining that it's not complex enough. So I kind of understand why movie makers take that approach. They're just trying to keep their audiences satisfied. I get it, but I do really wish more movies had this kind of simple storytelling. We don't always need to know all these complicated backstories and all these crazy different storylines going on. We just want to know the story. We want to know the mystery. So if you like murder mystery type movies, or if you like Alfred Hitchcock movies, this is definitely a movie that's right up your alley. Dial M for Murder is definitely a movie that I recommend. I've got kind of a random little smorgasbord of movies that I'm going to review. I don't currently have any other Alfred Hitchcock movies on my list, but feel more than free to leave any recommendations in the comments, or to leave your thoughts on this movie. And finally, I like to end all of my reviews on a positive note. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. Eleanor Roosevelt. Thank you so much for watching.